All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar from eLearning Brothers on how to create HTML interactions and designs using Edge Animate. And we're going to be talking about Edge Animate. We're going to be talking about how to get started with it. But a couple of housekeeping items. I can't hear you during this webinar, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the question and answer area. Now, I won't be looking at that the entire time. But every once in a while I will pause and take a look at that just to make sure I answer any questions that you may have. But I am more than happy to answer any questions, and if I don't get to them during the webinar, I will spend a little bit of time after the webinar going through the questions. And so if I don't get to them as I'm going through, then if you want to hang on after the webinar and get your questions answered, I'm more than happy to do that for you. So let's go ahead and start sharing my screen and talk about this. My name is Jeff Batt. I am with the eLearning Brothers, and I am the product development manager, so I'm actually in charge of the template library. If you don't know who eLearning Brothers is, we basically have a template library where we provide different templates, cutout people, stock images, and different types of games and interactions that you can use in pretty much a lot of different tools. And so we provide them in HTML, we provide them in Flash, we provide them in Storyline, we provide them in Lectora, we provide things that work with iSpring, and all sorts of different e-learning tools. And basically that's what I'm in charge of, is the development, what templates we come up with, the designs, the actual, working with my developers to make sure that these templates are working properly and everything. Now, I've been with eLearning Brothers for about a year now, but I've been in the e-learning realm for over 7 years, working with e-learning tools and different things like that. Now, you can find the different files that I'm going to be using on elearningtemplates.com. If you go there and sign up for a free account, you can actually download the Adobe Edge project files that I'm going to be working with. So you can go in and you can work with the same tabs interaction and everything, and you can do that with a free account. So you don't have to sign up for the paid account just to work with the two interactions that I'm going to be working with. Now, signing up for the paid account does give you access to a whole lot more stuff, and we have a lot of different Adobe Edge templates that you can use. Now, we're going to be talking about the benefits of why you would even use Adobe Edge templates compared to just building it inside of the tool. So we'll get to that here in a little bit, but that's where you can at least sign up for a free account if you have not already signed up, and go from there. Now, if you want to download these slides, because I do have slide notes on each of these slides that you can go through and read about what different parts of Adobe Edge there are, what different things do what, and get a little bit more detailed there. So if you go to the bit.ly/ebros-edge, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that or type that inside of the chat here. So as we move on here, you'll still have access to that link. So bit.ly/ebros-edge. So click on that link inside of the chat in your question and answer area, and that will take you to the slides that you can download this and everything. Now, on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/elearningbros, we'll have a recording of this webinar that you can review, and you can go back to it. If I go too fast, you can go back and review it at a later time. Now, before I get started into the presentation, I like to get to know my audience. So I like to get to know what type of users there are, if you've ever used Edge. And so I have a couple questions for you. Now, these questions are going to pop up on your screen. Go ahead and just apply or click the answer that applies to you the best. So first of all, I want to know what type of role you are. Are you a graphic designer, instructional designer, e-learning developer, web developer, or other? So go ahead and click on that right now. Okay, and I'll give a little bit more time here, a couple more seconds. Okay. So it looks like we have about 25% graphic designer, about split between the e-learning developer, instructional designer. Or you might be doing both. It basically, you may have shared jobs there. So another question is, what type of e-learning tool do you use? Do you use Articulate Storyline, Articulate Studio, Lectora, Captivate, or other? Okay, so looks like the majority of you used Articulate Studio. Now, this is good because Edge actually works great with any tool, whether you're using Lectora, Captivate, or Articulate Storyline or Articulate Studio. Okay, just a couple more questions real quick. Have you ever used Edge? Okay, so it looks like we have, the majority of you have never used it. Some of you, and also you've used it a little bit, and about 11% of you have used it moderately, but none are advanced users, which is good because this session is, because we only have an hour, I'm going to go over the basics of Edge. So it's if you've already been using it, you're an advanced user, then you're probably not going to get much out of this, and I just wanted to be upfront with that. So that's good. That the majority of you have not used that. And one last question is, have you used eLearning Brothers stuff before? The library subscription, the free library subscription, interaction builder, free interaction builder, or currently don't have ELB products? All right. So looks like it's split between library subscription and the interaction and the currently don't have ELB products. So, all right. Well, that helps me get to know my audience, so I know who I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and just get into the content. So the first question is, what is Adobe Edge? And so, like most people, when I talk about that, and I propose Edge as a solution, they don't even know what Edge is. They're like, what's Edge? Well, I've never even heard of Edge. Do I even have Edge? That's some of the first questions that I get when I even talk about Edge. So let's explain a little bit what Edge first is before we get into the actual application. Then we'll get into, I'm more of a hands-on person, so we'll get into how to use Edge and how to get started with it and how to start building some different interactions. Well, back in the day when I started with eLearning and I was in the eLearning field, Flash was the big thing. Flash was the big thing to get to know, to develop in, and to, if you wanted to really build some custom games, you wanted to build some custom animations, Flash was your #1 source. Well, we all know that that kind of went away because of Steve Jobs not allowing it, or Apple not allowing it on iOS devices. Well, that's all ancient history now. But that left a little bit of Flash developers, or left all the Flash developers kind of wondering, okay, what do I do now? What happens next? Now, Flash, just as a review, basically produced SWFs. And so you worked in the tool called Adobe Flash, and then you produced the content that played inside of Adobe Player, which was called the SWF. That was the output content. So you still develop in a different tool called Flash, but the output, again, was SWF. And the problem is, mobile devices don't play that SWF output. So that kind of left us wondering, okay, Flash was easy to use compared to hand coding it, doing it all by hand, so what do we do now? So in order to get HTML content, well, that's where a new tool came into play. Now, as soon as Steve Jobs wrote that letter, and there was a lot of different questions on saying, okay, what do I do now if I can't use Flash? What happens? Well, soon after that happened, Adobe released a beta version called Edge Animate, or actually at that time it was just Adobe Edge. Now, Adobe Edge, and I started working with it in the very early stages of it when it was just not even released to the public yet. But it looked like a promising tool then, and I started playing around with it, and it was basically what I considered to be Flash for HTML. Because it has a similar user interface as Flash does. And so you have a stage, you have a timeline, you can animate along that timeline, but the output content is different. So the output content is not an SWF, the output content is HTML. Well, the benefit to that is it can run on any mobile device. So you don't have to worry about, okay, am I developing this and I have to make sure that people have Flash Player installed on other devices. Well, the benefit is you don't have to worry. It will play on other devices. It will play on mobile. And so all you have to do is develop the content inside of Edge Animate. And it's come a long way since its early release, and it's you can do a lot. You can build different types of games, different types of interactions straight for HTML devices. Now, it's true that it's not specifically an e-learning tool. It wasn't designed for e-learning or anything like that. Well, Flash wasn't designed for e-learning as well. And so, but that doesn't stop us from using it inside of e-learning. And in my opinion, Edge Animate allows you to go beyond the restrictions of a normal authoring tool. So I love Articulate, I love Lectora. I think they're great and fast tools, but there's times where you need to go beyond what they can do. If you wanted to go, for example, just as a simple animation, you wanted to animate one object from the stage over to the other part of the stage. Well, you can't do that inside of Storyline. You can animate it in and you can animate it out, but you can't animate something that's already on the stage to another part of the stage. Well, if I need to do something like that, if I'm creating a game like a map, like one of our library games, like a marathon game, and I want to animate the point going from one point to the next point, well, how do I do that? Well, that's simple. You use Edge Animate to develop something like that. You produce the HTML, and then you bring it inside of your tool so you can still use the content that the Edge Animate produces inside of Articulate Storyline, or inside of Articulate Studio, or inside of Captivate, or inside of Lectora. So it really, or any other authoring tool that uses web objects, allows you to bring in external HTML content. And so that's the beauty about it, is it allows you to take this and really get some custom animations, some custom pages, and produce the HTML content. Now, it's true also that you could just build this type of content inside of Edge Animate and not even bring it inside of an authoring tool. But the authoring tool offers the benefits of more of a structure, different pages, quizzes, other stuff like that would take a lot more time to develop inside of Edge Animate. So I don't see this as a replacement for authoring tools, e-learning authoring tools. I see this as a supplement to be able to add on and to go beyond what is normally capable inside of a normal authoring tool. And so I just wanted to make sure that that's clear before we go on here. Now, it's true that Edge Animate is not the only tool that does this. There's a lot of tools out there that you can build custom HTML with a WYSIWYG type environment and then produce the HTML. One of the most notable tools that I want to mention is called Tumult Type, which is very similar to Edge, and you can build the same type of content, but it's a Mac-based only application. But if you wanted to look into that, Tumult Type, go ahead and look into that. That's probably another solution if you're not totally sold on Edge Animate. Now, where do you get Edge Animate? So the place that you can get Edge Animate is through html.adobe.com. And if you go there, you can download Edge Animate, but you can also download this complementary tools to use inside of Edge Animate. And so you can download like Edge Reflow, Edge Code, Edge Inspect, and so there's a lot of other tools that Adobe offers. Or if you have the Creative Cloud account and you're paying the $49 a month, which is, in my opinion, well worth it, you can download as part of the Creative Cloud Edge Animate. It comes with it. And so download it and then you can start using it. So you may already have access to it that you're not aware of if you've never even opened it up. But that's how you get Edge Animate. And once you get it, then you can go in and you can start using it and start building the content and then start producing it. Now, you don't even have to. If you're going to build more performance type of applications, you don't even need to bring these types of HTML interactions inside of your authoring tools. And in fact, if you are working with Tin Can at all, you can even implement Tin Can inside of your Edge Animate and just have a standalone game that will still report over via Tin Can. So when you first pull up Edge Animate, you get the user interface. Now on the left-hand side, you see where we can create a new project. You also see the recent files, any recent files that you may already have. But on the right-hand side, it gives you some different options. It allows you to get started and shows you different tutorials. It shows you key features. It shows you resources that you can get to. There's a lot of resources, a lot of user groups, a lot of tutorials that you can get to for Edge Animate. And so that's the first thing when you launch up Edge Animate. Now, if you were to create a new project, the first thing after you create a new project is to save your project. Now, Edge Animate works with a bunch of different files, so this is one thing to keep in mind, that you will have multiple files that you're working with, because HTML by itself usually has JavaScript and it has CSS and stuff like that. So when you're producing HTML, you're not just going to have one output. That was a benefit about Adobe Flash, is typically you would just have a SWF. But in this case, because it's HTML, you're going to have multiple files to work with. So let's go ahead and get started with some of those files. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch over here. And I'm going to come over to Edge Animate. and I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to click over here on the left-hand side, create new, and this will create a completely new project for me. Now I could start developing it before I even save it, but I like to save it first of all. So I'm going to go up to File, Save, or just hit Command S if you're on a Mac, or Control S if you're on a PC. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. Because it has all these different files in there, I want to make sure all those files are contained within one folder. So if I'm going to build kind of a tab interaction, I'm just going to call this tab 1, and then I'm going to click on Create. So there's my folder. I placed it on my desktop, and now I'm going to name the main file in my folder. I'm going to name this index, or I'm going to name this tab. It doesn't really matter. The standard when you're developing for web is to name it index, because that's the first file that it comes to when you actually go to that address once you've uploaded it. But some tools like I know Captivate and Lectora don't like to have it named index because it will replace the main content. So you want to make sure you name it something different, like tab, or tab 1 or game, or whatever you want it to do there. And you can always change it later if you wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and just name this one tab 1 and hit save. And then now I have my first interaction that I can start building here. Well, if I go to my desktop, and let me go ahead and open up this folder. So I have this folder here, and you'll notice all these different files that I'm working with. Well, let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so I can see these files. So I have a tab1.an file. Well, that AN file allows me to open up my Edge Animate project at any time. So if I come in here and I've closed out my Edge Animate and I just want to open up the project, well, instead of clicking on the HTML file, if I do that, it's just going to pull up a browser. Instead of clicking on the HTML file, if I want to open up and edit the project inside of Edge, then I'm going to click on this .an file. So I'm going to double click on that, and then it should open Edge. I'm not sure why it's not doing that now, but there we go. So it will open up the Edge Animate project so I can continue editing at that point. It also has some other JavaScript files that it needs in order to run. And if I click on this Edge_includes, it will also include some other JavaScript like jQuery. It uses some jQuery already associated with it. So you can use jQuery right within Edge. Now, you don't need to know the code. You don't even need to get into the code. A lot of what Edge does walks you through it and makes it a lot easier than trying to hand code this. Because you could hand code this if you want to. There is no restriction. You could attach jQuery. You can go in and you can attach these different event listeners and different things that will happen when something's clicked on. You could do all that with hand coding. The benefit with Edge is you can visually see it, just like you could with Flash. You can visually see it, you can animate it, and work with it right inside of here. Okay, so now that we have our project started, we know where our files are at. Let's go ahead and move on here. And the next thing that we're working with, and we're going to explore the UI, the user interface, and we're going to explore what the different elements of it are. And the first one that you see is the stage area. Now the stage area is where you have different objects on the stage that you can animate. So you see what's on the stage, you can see what's off the stage, and you can animate those objects in and out. So if you're creating a tab interaction, this is where you would place your tabs. Or if you're creating a game, this is where you would have your map. You would place that map and you would design it out right inside of Edge Animate. So that's your main file. And you see two rulers going up on top and one on the side. This tells you the position and the size of your Edge Animate projects. And so that allows you to basically resize the Edge Animate into whatever size that you want. Now, Edge Animate has some benefits. If I go in here, let's change the background. Over on the left-hand side is my properties. Over on the left-hand side, I can select this little white box here, and this will pop open a spot for me to change my background. Well, if I hit save, and I want to see what this looks like inside of a browser, all I have to do is hit Control-Enter on a PC or Command-Enter on a Mac, and this will pop open a preview in my browser, so I can see exactly what it's going to look like inside of my browser. Now, if I'm going to design an HTML content, because you'll notice that this kind of takes the place on the left-hand side, and it has a certain height and certain width. If I'm going to design this for like a storyline course, or a Lectora course, or a Captivate course, I need to know the size of what it's going to be placed in. And once I know the size of that, which if you're working with Articulate, the default size is 720 by 540. With Captivate, I think it's a little bit different. It's like 1024 by 768. But I just come into the left-hand side and I change the width and I change the height. And this allows me to adjust this to fit perfectly inside of my inside of my content area. So now if I hit Control Enter, there we go. I have a bigger size. And once I bring this inside of Storyline or I bring it inside of Captivate, that's going to be the size that it's going to use, is that 720 by 540. However, one of the benefits about Edge Animate is it allows you to adapt to any size. Now, the restriction here, though, is if you bring this inside of Articulate or you bring this inside of Captivate, well, they use an iframe. Now, the iframes don't automatically resize. There's some things that you can do to have it resize, but by default, they don't automatically resize. So it's something that you have to be aware of. But if you're going to use this Edge Animate outside as like with a learning performance application or something like that, then you don't have to worry about that. You can resize your different Edge Animate files to fit different types of tablets or phones or anything like that. So and that's where I like this, or that's the reason why I like Edge Animate, is it lifts up that restriction of just having one or two sizes. Basically, you can resize it to fit any. So the way that you do this is over on the left-hand side in your Properties panel. You can switch where it says the width, right next to where it says 720 by 540. You see this little PX symbol. Well, if you hover over it, that's actually a little, you can see it's an off and on switch. So if I click on that, it will actually switch over to a percentage for my width. That means if I hit Control Enter, it's going to automatically take the width of whatever browser it's playing in. So if it's playing in a mobile device, it's going to automatically take the width of that. If it's playing in a desktop like this one, it's going to automatically take the width of the desktop. And so it just automatically adjusts for me. And so I can do the same thing with the height as well. So if I go in and say, okay, height, let's change that to 100% as well. Well, with 2 button clicks, it automatically now fills the entire browser no matter what size it is. Well, that's great, but then you still have to worry about your content. Okay, is my content going to resize? Is it going to reposition? But Edge Animate also works really well with content when you're working with different types of resizable content. So if I come in here, let's go ahead and switch the height back to where it was before. And so let's just leave the width at 100%. Now, if I come back in here, up on the top is my toolbar. This is where I can create different objects, my text, my shapes, and different things like that. Well, if I select on one of these shapes, I can go ahead and draw out that shape on my stage. And now, with that shape on my stage, I have a lot of different things in my Properties panel that you can see that automatically appear. If I select my stage area again, all that content goes away. So the Properties panel is dependent on what's selected. So if I go back to my shapes, now I can come into the color of my shape. If I wanted to change the color, if I wanted to come in here and let's say I wanted to have like a gradient color, you can see that I can change the gradient. There's a lot of different things I can do here. And I can come down to shadow. I can add a drop shadow by clicking on this little drop shadow button, and then I can change the drop shadow distance, blur, and other options like that. I'm not going to get too detailed into stylize or how to stylize your different interactions here, but let's go ahead and play around with this, okay? So let's come in here and let's say I just want to, because we're adjusting this to the maximum width, if I hit Control Enter, my shape is just going to be over on the left-hand side. It's not going to automatically adjust. But if I wanted the width to adjust, then I go ahead and select my shape, and I come over to my properties, and under the width section, I'm going to go ahead and select, switch from pixels over to a percentage. Now it's not 100%, but it is a certain percentage. It automatically adapts there for me. So now if I hit Control S to save it, and Command Enter to preview it, you'll notice that the shape automatically adjusts for me. So now if I preview it and I resize it, you'll notice the shape is automatically resizing as well. So that's the size, and I can do that also with the height and the width. But what about the position? Let's say I want it to always be on a certain side or something like that. So I can move my shape over to the right-hand side, and then I can come over in the position and size section. There's this little square box. Well, if I select relative to the right, if I select on this little square over on the right hand side, well, this automatically positions it over on the right. So it's always going to be on the right hand side. So no matter what size it is, it's just always going to be positioned over on the right. Well, I don't have to do that specifically on the right. I could just place it anywhere. So let me go ahead and position it somewhere else. I can place it anywhere, and I can come over to my X and my Y value, and I can actually flip that switch over to a percentage sign as well. So it's always going to be positioned. X value goes across from left to right. Y value goes from top to bottom. So that's basically from top to bottom. That's the Y value. If you're worried about, okay, height-wise, where is it going to be positioned, or from side to side, where is it going to be positioned, that's what you deal with, is the X and the Y value. So now if I hit Control-Enter, you'll notice there it is. It's now positioned 39% from the left. If I readjust it, you'll notice it readjusts the position as well, and it's always going to be 39% from the left. Well, there could be a time where you kind of go a little too far. Let's say I don't want to go as far to the left, I don't want to go as far to the right. Well, the next option that you can do, if I click on my stage area, is I can set a minimum width and a maximum height, or a minimum width and a maximum width. So the minimum width, I say, okay, it's good, but I don't want to go below like 100, or I don't want to go below, let's just even say 400 at this time. So now if I hit Control-Enter, it's not going to go below, which I don't think my browser even goes below 400, but it's not going to go below 400. Well, the maximum width, I have to do a little different here. I have to select where it says maximum width, uncheck where it says none, and then now I say, okay, I don't want to go beyond, because I don't want it too stretched out. I don't want to go beyond, let's just so we can visibly see it, 700. And now if I hit Control-Enter, you'll notice it doesn't go beyond the 700, but if I go below the 700, it will automatically readjust. So this is what the hype is right now with HTML, is creating responsive designs. So having it, because there's hundreds of different tablets. Each of those tablets have pretty much their own screen size. So as web developers or as e-learning developers developing content that's going to go on the web, even if it's on an LMS, that means it's on the web, we need to worry about having it kind of make it responsive so it automatically adapts to whatever size that we're working with. And so that's why I love Edge, because it automatically, just with a couple button clicks, automatically does that for you. So you don't have to worry about, okay, is this going to look good on the iPad compared to an Android tablet or something like that. So I'm going to pause here because we're about halfway through, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit more of the interactivity. Now, I wish I had enough time to cover everything about Edge Animate, but we don't have that much time to cover it. So I'm just going to get into some of the more interactive stuff that you can create and the types of interactions that you can build right inside of Edge Animate. Now, over on the bottom here, let's just go over a little bit of animating. At the bottom, we have our timeline, and this is where you work with animation. So if I have a shape on my stage, and let me just adjust the percentage just to be normal here. But if I have a shape on my stage, the quickest way to animate inside of Edge Animate is to come down to the timeline, and you could just, there's something called the pin tool, which I absolutely love. It's the best animation tool that I've come across for any type of web or Flash or anything like that. Now, the way that you use the pin tool is you double click on this red line. If I move my red line back and forth, I can double click to get into the pin tool. I know that I'm in the pin tool when I see this little blue dot over the actual yellow section there. And now if I take this yellow part, so let me get back into it. If I take this yellow part, I can move that forward, and I see a little yellow bar that goes across from that blue dot and this blue line to the red line. And so, or if I move it back, it's now going to change to blue. Now there's a difference here. If I move this forward, basically what I'm saying is this blue line is the current position that it's at right now. This is where it's currently going to go, or currently going to be on that blue line. Well, if I'm moving the red line forward, that means I'm going to then take this and I can drag my object to a different part of the stage, and the red line is where it's going to end up. And so now, once I've moved my yellow line, that's where I want the object to animate. So if I hit Control Enter, now the object's going to animate over there. And that's the quickest way that I've found to animate. So now if I double click to get out of that pen tool, I can then move my cursor on this red line over a little bit more, double click to get into it, and then drag out that area again and then move it up a little bit. And now I can have different sections of animations. Again, I've done a lot of animations and tools like Flash and everything, and this is absolutely the best way of animating and the quickest way of animating that I've found. Okay, so that's how you move it forward, but if I move it backwards, let's go ahead and just delete some of these. If I take my cursor and I double click into it and I move my red line backwards, the blue line again is the current position of where it's at. So if I then take my object and I move it off the stage, let me delete everything here real quick. So the blue line is the current position of where it's at. So if I take this and move it off the stage here, the red line is where I move it to, and then again the blue line is where it was at before I started it. So now I've just in a couple clicks made something animate from off the stage to on the stage. So that's applicable if you're working with like bullet points and you want to animate different things kind of on your stage. You can do that quickly inside of Edge Animate. And if I hit Control Enter, there we go, it's off the stage and now it comes on the stage. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction to animating. I really want to get into more interactivity, and so I'm going to spend a little bit more time here with the interactivity. I do highly recommend you go over all my slides here. I will talk about in detail in the presenter notes. I talk about what each of these different elements do inside of the properties. Also what some of the elements do inside of the timeline and different things like that. So you can check that out in the slide notes that you download. Okay, so if I come in here, now let's go ahead and I'm going to drag out this shape here. And I'm going to create two shapes. So right now I have my rectangle and I'm now going to create a circle. So these two shapes, I'm going to ask the learner a question, and the learner is going to click on one of these shapes in order to see the results. This is a really basic interaction, but it will help you get started with creating these different types of interactions. And then you can get more detailed. If you go to our library and you hover over Activities, come down to Edge Animate Games. These are all the different games that we've built so far inside of Edge Animate. Let me click on this board game one. This is one of my favorite ones. So here's the board game. If I click on Continue, I can choose a person, and then I can choose this little dice. It'll roll the dice, and then it will automatically animate that point, and I can click on different questions, different answers, see my feedback and everything like that. Now we're doing this with the basics that I'm teaching you here, with the basic click to go to different parts in the timeline. That's what we're doing here, and this is kind of the start of building a game like that. Now you don't have to build it from scratch. If you have the template library, you can download these and you can tweak them however you want, but this is the basics of how you would build something like that. So I'm now going to come in and I'm going to add some text. And you can add some text by coming up to the top left-hand side, selecting the text box, and then clicking on anywhere on the stage. And this will pop open with the text box here. And now I can actually type in some of my text. And so I can say, which one is a circle? And again, I can stylize this a lot better, but just for the sake of demoing it here, I'm just going to type that in, which one is a circle, and then we have our two objects, our circle and then our square here. Now, from here, I need to kind of set my timeline up, because automatically, you'll notice if I click anywhere on my stage, excuse me, if I click anywhere on my stage, you'll notice in my properties panel, there's something called Autoplay. Now the autoplay is checked. That means when the learner starts this, it's going to automatically start playing the timeline. Well, the timeline, we don't want that to happen. If we want to show different things at different points, we want to take them to different points in the timeline. Coming back to my example inside of the library, When you see that I have a little menu here, and then I have a place where the question pops up. Let me spin again here. So this question is a point in the timeline that we're jumping to. Once the question is done, we jump them back to the menu, and then they can continue by rolling the dice, and it automatically animates the person along the game board. Well, but we're still jumping to different points in the timeline, kind of like if you're at all familiar with Flash, kind of like jumping to different keyframes inside of Flash. If you're not familiar with it, then don't worry about that. I'm going to show you how to do it inside of Edge Animate here. Now, the best way to structure your timeline so you make sense of, okay, this is where I need to go. If they click on the circle, go to this point in the timeline. If they click on the square, go to this point in the timeline. And then at that point in the timeline, I would show what I want to show during the circle part. In that point in the timeline, I would show what I want to show in the square part. And so that's kind of the logic that you need to think of, is if you're going to have these different questions, you're going to have these different parts inside of your timeline. You need to set up your timeline to do that. So down at the timeline, you'll notice this little, and it's hard to see, I apologize, this little rectangle or this little triangle. If I hover over this timeline triangle, you'll notice a little pop-up that says Insert Label. Now I could also come up to my timeline, and I can go down to my timeline option in my menu, and I can go down to Insert Label and do the same thing here. Now this will insert a label wherever this red line is. And so if I click on this option, now I can click on or just type out what parts of the timeline I'm going to be jumping to. So the first part is question. Well, let's move my timeline over a little bit more, and I'm going to have, okay, what's going to happen if they click on the circle? And then I'm going to move my timeline over a little bit more, my red line, and create a new label, and this is where I'm going to jump to if they click on square. So I'm going to uncheck where it says Autoplay over on my properties. And now the idea again is I want to create, when they click on the circle, I want to jump them to the point in the timeline that's going to show the response for circle. If they click on square, I'm going to jump them to the point in the timeline that's going to show them what it's going to do for the square, basically. And to illustrate this a little bit more, I'm also going to come in here, and so I'm going to download one of these games. And so we can see what it looks like in these games here. Again, this is found at the eLearning Brothers template library. Okay, so now what we need to do is if I take my timeline, so I'm going to move my red line, I'm going to move it to the square or to the circle part. This shows me what's visible on the stage at that point in the timeline. So with that option selected, now I need to hide certain things once it gets to this point in the timeline. So if I'm going to be talking about the circle at this point in the timeline, well, I want to hide the square. I don't want to show the square. So I come over to the square here, and I select the square, come over to my properties, and you'll notice two little eyeballs. Well, on those two little eyeballs, I have a drop-down box that says off or on. And now I can select off, and this will not show at that point in the timeline. That means you'll notice this little diamond here. That means from here, if I take my scrubber and I move in the question section, from here to here, it's going to show the square. But as soon as it gets to the circle, it's not going to show the square anymore. Well, if I then move my timeline over to the square, well, now I want the square to show. So with that object still selected, and I notice in my timeline I have it selected, now I can select the drop-down box to on. And you'll notice it creates a little, another little diamond here. And now you can see that during the square part, it's going to be on. During the circle part, it's going to be off. And during the question part, it's going to be on. Well, on the square part, we need to then hide the circle. So if I go in here and select the circle, and then let's click off at this point. So during the square part, the circle is going to be off, but during the circle part, it's going to be on. So it takes a little getting used to, but once you've done that a couple of times, it's actually extremely easy to work with. So we've set up our timeline to show the square when we click on the square, and to show the circle when we click on the circle. But now we need to jump them to that point in the timeline, because right now if I hit Control Enter or Command Enter, nothing happens. I don't get to that point in the timeline. Because I'm not auto-playing it through, it's just automatically going to stop. It's going to stop at the very first and not play anything. But I need to jump them to these points in order to show and hide different things, basically. So I'm going to click on this square, and I'm going to come up to my actions is what it's called. Now over on the left hand side, you'll notice my properties, and you'll notice these little brackets over on my property section. If I hover over it, it says open actions. You can get to that also down at the bottom in my timeline. You'll notice these brackets that says open actions. And over in my elements panel, there's also these brackets that say open actions as well. Well, if I click on this, now I have different things that I can listen for. Now, instead of memorizing this code, Adobe Edge actually shows you these hints. So you don't have to memorize, okay, how do I do a click event inside of Edge Animate or inside of JavaScript? How do I, have something happen when the mouse or when somebody swipes over, or swipes left or swipes right? You don't have to listen for that. Again, as an example, going into our template library, let me hover over activities. I'm going to go down to Edge Animate interactions, and I'm going to go to one of our tab interactions, and you'll notice that we have these different event listeners. So clicking on this plus icon, you'll notice we have a click event listener that when you click on the tab, it takes us to tab 1 inside of our timeline. When you click on this tab, it takes us to tab 3. But we also have another event listener called swipe. So when I swipe, move my mouse on this little thing, and I swipe left and I swipe right, it takes me to the different things inside, like you're flipping through a page or something like that. So you can do that inside of Edge. And I'm going to download this project, so we'll take a look at it as well. But that's kind of the basic structure of it. So in this case, I need to hit this plus icon, and I need to say, okay, when the user clicks, go ahead and over on the right-hand side, again, I don't need to memorize this code to do some basic interactions here. But over on the right-hand side, we have a stop, we have a play, we have a stop at, we have a reverse play, we have a get a symbol, get a variable, different things like that that we can do. Well, I'm just going to stop. Actually, no, let's stop at. And if I click stop at, it's basically going to add this little stop command, and it's going to add a number. Now that number is the point in the timeline that it's going to stop at. Well, we don't know the exact number, but we do know the label. Moving this over a little bit, we established the question label, the circle label, and the square label. So we know the label. I'm just going to go ahead and exchange this for the label. So I'm going to go circle. Actually, we have the rectangle selected, so I'm going to go rectangle. And so now if I hit Control Enter, when I click on that rectangle, I named it square, not rectangle, square. There we go. So now if I click on it, there we go. It takes me to my square point, and I know that because my circle has now disappeared. And now I need to do the same thing with my circle. So I select my circle, come up to my actions, select the click action, and now I'm going to say stop at, change the number to inside quotes. I'm going to put the title of the label, say circle, and now if I hit Control Enter, hit the circle, it takes me to the circle point. Well, one more thing I need to do is if I want the learner to be able to go back to the question, well, I just come back in here and let's just create a new button or something. And on that button, we're just going to go back to the main. So we do the same thing. So we click on Open Actions, click, and then we're going to have it stop at, and now we're going to have it stop at the question label. There we go. But I don't want this button to be visible until they get to a circle or square. So moving my timeline, I'm going to take this to the circle, and I'm going to say, okay, at this point is when it's going to be on. Anytime before that, like during the question, it's not going to be on. After that, either on the square or the circle, it's going to be on. So now let's hit Control Enter, hit the square, we take it to the square. Now that button is visible. Click on it, takes us back. I can now click on the circle and do that as well. So that's the initial start of creating something like this tab interaction that I just downloaded. And let me show this, and then I'll look at my questions here. So I'm going to open up this, and again, if you have the template library, you don't need to do all that programming. We've done it for you. And it's really not that, I mean, you're just selecting the different options, so it's really not that difficult to do, but we've already done it for you. You can just go in and update the text, basically. So some reason it's not wanting to do that. Let me open up here. There we go. Okay, so along my timeline in this tab interaction, you'll notice my introduction label. I have tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 4, tab 5, tab 6, and tab 7. Well, what happens is if I move my cursor over here, move my red line, you'll notice now I see the content for tab 1. Move it over to tab left, now I see the content for tab 2. Now I see the content for tab 3. So basically we're hiding and showing different things at different points in the timeline. And then with these tabs over on the left hand side, we are jumping you to the different points in that timeline. So you can create a tab interaction inside of Edge Animate with barely any code. Now we've added additional code beyond that, so we have these swipes. And so coming over to my content area, if I select on this object and then come up to my actions, you'll notice we have a swipe left. And we're going to, on the swipe left, we're jumping to tab 1. On the swipe left on tab 1, we're jumping to tab 2. So it's and then again, we're hiding and showing different things in here as well, just to keep that in mind. But that's the basic structure of creating a tab interaction or even creating a game. So let's go into game. I'm going to click on open here. I'm going to open up this game show game. And now you can see down at the bottom we have, this is where we jump to for question 1. This is where we jump to for question 2. This is where we jump to question 3. The submit button will show the feedback and then jump back to the game board here. And we take them back to the game board. So that's the basic structure of creating, and that's all the time that I have to show as far as creating the structure of it. But now let's show how do I get this over to my tool. Well, with every tool it is a little bit different, but one thing I do want to show is at least how to export the content. So if I come back into this folder, and this is my initial tab folder, you don't want to grab everything here and then place it on a website. What you first of all want to do is you want to come into Edge Animate, click on File, and then go to Publish Settings. Well, if you click on Publish Settings, this will allow you to publish to 3 different targets: the web, Animate Deployment Package, or iBooks. You could actually create an interaction, publish it out, bring it inside of iBooks Author, and allow the user to interact with it inside of an iBook. And so if you're creating any type of iBook or any type of interaction like that for a book, an ebook, or anything like that, this is the way to go. Let me select all 3 of those options. We have an Animate Deployment Package, which is how you would bring it into Dreamweaver if you're working with it inside of Dreamweaver or InDesign or something like that. And then I'm going to click Save. Now if I publish, going to File and then going to Publish, you'll see it kind of blink a little bit, and now we've published. It doesn't really give us a message or anything, but if I come into this Publish folder on my desktop, these are my 3 different deployment packages. So we have the web, we have iBooks, and we have Animate Package. Well, if I click on Animate Package, it just has an OAM file. So you can then bring that inside of InDesign. If you're creating an ebook inside of InDesign, you can bring it inside of iBooks, this little widget file. You can bring that inside of iBooks, and then you can have an interactive element inside of iBooks. And then you can bring it inside of the web. Now the web has more content, but this is the file that you would then take and you would upload to a website, or you would upload it and to insert it inside of Captivate or insert it inside of Lectora. For the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to do this inside of Storyline. So if I come into Storyline and I click on New Project, and then I click on, and we have other videos on our YouTube channel on how to insert it inside of Captivate, how to insert it inside of Lectora. But the key is if you have a web object inside of your tool. So if something called web object is there, this is inside of Studio, Articulate Studio, as well as Storyline. So keep that in mind. But if I select the web object, I then come into where it says enter a web address. And instead of entering a URL, I click on this folder icon. This folder icon will allow me to navigate to the content that I just created. Now the published content, not the Adobe Edge content. So keep that in mind. You don't want to go to the publish or the Adobe Edge content. click on, for some reason I'm not seeing my drive. Let me see. This PC. Oh, there we go. So there's my desktop. Here's my my tab 1 interaction. Click on publish, and all I need to do is find the folder. So I'm going to find the folder for web, click OK, and I'm going to have it display in the side of the slide and click OK. Now, it will not preview until I've actually published it out. That's what it says when if I decide to preview this inside of Storyline. It will not show the preview. It will say that I have to publish this out, and before it would actually show the preview. But that's all I have to do. That's all I have to do. When I publish this out inside of Lectora, when I publish this out inside of Captivate, or when I publish this out inside of Storyline or Studio, it will actually have that HTML content and all the files that it needs in that published folder. So I don't have to worry about is it somewhere else on the web. It's all contained within inside of that folder. Okay, so there's a whole lot more to go over. I highly recommend that you take a look at these slides. I do show you how to integrate with some of the tools like Edge Commons. Edge Commons allows you to play sound inside of your Adobe Edge project. So you can, when you click on it, you hear a sound, or you click on a button, you hear a sound, or when you go to a game, you'll hear the intro page. We do that inside of our template library with Edge Commons because there's no default way to do that inside of Edge. But you can also do something with GreenSock to be able to animate different things and create some really cool effects. You can insert web contents like YouTube videos inside of Edge, and I show you the code for that and everything inside of my slides. And so let me pull up my slides link again, and you can go ahead and download the link for that. But this time, that's all that I have. So let me go ahead and answer a question here, or we'll go through the different questions. One question is this being recorded for future reference? Yes, it is. If you go to our YouTube channel, let me just type in our YouTube channel as well. Okay, so it's YouTube/eLearningBros. That's where the recording will be as soon as it's ready, and you can take a look at it. I think we'll also post it. We'll have Parker, our social guys, post it on the blog, and so you can keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, we still have 7 minutes. I'm not seeing any other questions, so either I've answered them all, or basically we can go in. I want to show you a couple other things. I was just going to leave some time for questions. Parker did ask how I got to be this cool, and that's a long discussion, so I'm not going to go over it now. But a couple other things that you can do inside of Edge Animate because we have time. Let's go ahead and actually delete some of these. I'm going to delete some of my layers and some of my buttons. So one other nice thing that you can do is you can actually have animated objects within. So if I'm jumping to different points in my timeline, well, what happens if I want something kind of animated, kind of pulsating? Well, some feature that you could do inside of Flash actually transferred over to Edge Animate as well. And so one example, coming back into our interactions, I'm going to go into the Adobe Edge Animate games, and I'm going to go into my board game here, and you'll notice these little pulsating images under my object. Even though I'm stopped at one point in my timeline, I still have something animating, something still going. Well, in order to do that, you have to have what's called a movie clip on the stage. Now, if here, because of my timeline is kind of stopped, I'm just going to type in some text. And I'm going to just move that text over here. And now I'm going to just place my object here, a different object, and I'm just going to hit Control-Save and then Control-Enter. You'll notice nothing's happening. It just has a timeline just kind of stuck there. And even if I added some animation, like if I went in here and just kind of added some animation to this object, it wouldn't animate until I tell it to animate. I have to add a trigger on there. Well, what if I want it animating before I add that or before I jump to any certain points? Well, that's where you would take your object and you would right click on it and you would go down to convert to symbol. Now, when you convert to symbol, you need to give it a symbol name. So I'm going to name this one square. And I'm going to have this option autoplay the timeline because I want, what happens is when you create a symbol, that symbol now has its own timeline inside of it. So you can animate that object along its own timeline. Even if the main timeline is not animating, that object will be pulsating, or it'll be animating, or it'll be spinning, or whatever you animate it to do. It will not be dependent upon the parent timeline. And so if I hit OK, now to get into that timeline, I have to go in and I have to double click on this object. Double clicking on the object, you'll notice everything else kind of grays out. And also, my timeline only has the object inside of this movie clip. So now I can come in and I can add other objects on here. You can do whatever you want. This is a full timeline that you can do that's not going to be dependent upon the parent timeline. So now if I come in here, let's go ahead and just add a little animation. Let's just rotate this. Transform, rotation. I'm going to have this kind of rotate over. There we go. And then as soon as it gets to the end of the timeline, you can add something, a timeline trigger. Okay, as soon as this happens, what is it going to do? Now you do that by clicking on this little button under actions. You can click on, if you hover over the little brackets and it says insert trigger, you could basically just say, okay, play from and jump back to 0. Jump back to the beginning. And so now as it's going to play, get to this point in the timeline and jump back to the middle. So, or jump back to the very beginning. So if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice now it's kind of constantly spinning because as soon as it gets to the end of the timeline, it's going to jump back to the beginning of the timeline, but only inside of that movie clip. And so we're not affected by the main timeline. I can have this little spinning element inside of its own timeline. Now I could come in and copy, because it's a movie clip, you could easily just copy and paste that in any position that you want or in any place that you want. You can have multiple objects in there. So now if I hit Control Enter, oh, I have to make sure that that's at the very first here. Oh, it's also moving, but it's moving on my main timeline. Let me delete that. There we go. So now we have our two spinning objects. So that's the beauty of working with movie clips. You can use a movie clip inside of your inside of Edge Animate and work with multiple different types of animations. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. We're out of time. If you have any final questions, I'll go ahead and stick on the line for a minute or two. If you don't have any final questions, thank you for taking the time to look at Edge Animate. Hopefully it was a great introduction. I know there's still a lot more to be covered. If you do want to, we will post different information, different blogs on eLearningBrothers.com, so you can check that out, and also on our YouTube channel, so you can go ahead and check that out as well. But thank you, everyone.